Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. The latest culture war in education is being fought over how public schools ought to teach students about issues concerning race, gender, and important episodes in U.S. history. But schools are not the only places where children learn about American history and values. In Playing with History, American Identities and Children's Consumer Culture, Molly Rosner, Director of Education Programs at the LaGuardia and Wagner Archives at LaGuardia Community College, reveals how children's toys, books, and other amusements have always taught a distorted version of American history. The book is published by Rutgers University Press. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, what prompted you to write this book?
I was always interested in the ways people talk about their own histories and relate it to, national identity or to their family lore. And then in graduate school, I became really interested in how nostalgia and memory get mixed up and conflated with the study of history, no matter how objective you think it is. And especially when it comes to speaking about childhood, suddenly it's just a real jumble of emotions mixed up with what we think of as the cold hard facts. So I began just investigating the ways nostalgia gets infused into the items of our childhood, particularly when they're ostensibly teaching about history. Not New York specifically, though there is a lot.
And you talked about the artifacts of childhood, which would include books, toys, and other amusements that children play with. Now, the American toy industry didn't really get up and running until the early 20th century. How did these, I guess before that, you're looking either at homemade toys or toys imported from Germany.
Right. It was a more hodgepodge kind of toy market, if you will. I wouldn't even call it a market. But before industrialization, really, there was, corn husk dolls and scraps of fabric to make dolls that a loved one might make for you. And then if you were wealthy, you might import a doll from a country like Germany that had years and years of experience making really finely crafted, fancy dolls. So that was really reserved for an elite group of children. And then around the, industrialization in the early 20th century, American manufacturers began to compete with this market and really make buying toys and dolls part of the American childhood, the experience of being an American child. So all of a sudden, makers like Ford are in the doll market. They're trying to make the mass manufacturer feel artisanal, much like we do today. We often say something is artisanal, even if it's mass produced, because it's got this allure to it. And early manufacturers were doing that as well, making it part of the home, part of something that was quintessential to your childhood.
So how did these mass-produced toys differ from the toys that had preceded them? And did they convey any particular kind of message?
It was still a budding industry, so I wouldn't want to say there was kind of one particular message, but the market was to those who could afford to buy toys. So a lot of the time it was primarily white dolls sold in department stores to middle and upper middle class and upper class parents.
But they were gender focused, right?
Right from the start, there was a lot of gender identity infused into these dolls and these toys. So young boys were getting, tin soldiers and toys that promoted this very masculine identity, and children and young girls were getting dolls that were meant to enforce their caretaking behaviors and to stay domesticated in the home. But what I've learned through this research is really that children are going to play with toys the way they want to, and producers can't predict or control how children receive the messages they're trying to give. So I don't want it to come off as though children are just passive receptors to these messages. They found ways to rebel and reinterpret and create new stories from the items that they got, which is hard to find in archival documents, but it's something you can see today too.
And these mass-produced toys were marketed, I think you said, primarily to white children, I guess middle class, I guess working class children had some toys too. And there was a paucity of toys for, you know, black children, certainly Native American children.
There were not only different toys or toys marketed for white children, there were different marketplaces. So rather than the kind of vendor on the street, there were department stores behind glass windows. And so even where you bought the toys was getting bifurcated. The toys that were not white were often reinforcing racial stereotypes, white supremacy, were kind of showing children how to behave in a world that was unequal, and how to treat a black doll was not advertised as the same as how you would treat a white doll. So a white doll is a member of your family, a black doll would be a character that was a servant or something you could play violently with.
Speaking of dolls, dolls have been a major segment of the toy industry. I don't know if they are as much so now as they used to be, but you chose to include a chapter about the 1938 doll collection show in New York. Why?
That's an interesting little piece of doll history that actually the doll show you're referring to took place just down the street on 34th Street in a furniture store. And I saw this small newspaper article about it, that a group of doll collectors were showing this show. And it was incredibly successful, surprisingly so. And what I find interesting is this was not the case of dolls meant for children to play with. This was really adults using dolls to tell their own message to adults.
These were dolls that were collected primarily by wealthy women.
Yes, so the founder of the National Doll and Toy Collectors Club really saw these dolls as a way to convey her own worldview and her own message. So she wrote a book actually called The Marriage of Diamonds and Dolls, and it's drawn from her collection of wedding dolls, and it takes you through American history through her dolls, and she creates stories around these dolls about the Western frontier, about what it means to be an American, descended from European royalty. And she claims to be creating an almost encyclopedic book of American history, but it's incredibly, there's no black dolls. There is one Puerto Rican doll in it, but it's primarily white and Protestant. And she's really trying to show an America that didn't reflect the reality of the 1930s at all. So I found it interesting that these so-called innocent objects, these dolls, these toys, were being used so purposefully to tell one specific story about America. And then the same chapter shows kind of a different side of that with the Mamie and Kenneth Clark doll study, where dolls were a crucial part of the Brown versus Board of Education court case that highlighted how detrimental and how cruel segregation was, and how early it influenced kids and their perception of beauty and race.
And those studies were done in the 50s and 60s, and basically they showed that dolls were identical except for their color to both white children and black children, and almost universally the children, whether they were black or white, if you asked them who was a good doll or who was the pretty doll, they would say it was a white doll. If you asked them who was the bad doll or the ugly doll, they would say it was the black doll.
It's really heartbreaking to read about, to see how, in some ways, how little has changed. But these were actually in the late 30s and 40s, these studies, and then used in the 1950s in the court case. Yeah.
So what kind of dolls were, while you're having this doll show that features these priceless dolls from around the world and dolls, I guess, from the Victorian era, what kinds of dolls were girls actually playing with at that time?
There were mass market dolls. I was really focused on this specific set that adults were focusing on. But it was pre-Barbie. Barbie was in the 1950s. But there were Madame Alexander dolls. There were collectible dolls, and still a lot of homemade dolls, honestly. But it wasn't till the mid-century and later that these dolls like Barbie and then American Girl really took over as kind of symbols of American girlhood.
Right. And I remember when Barbie was the last doll I got. I got dolls up until I was still playing with dolls at age 13, and she was my final doll. But I think she was one of the original Barbies. Another big childhood pastime, obviously, is reading. And in one chapter, you devote an entire chapter about the kinds of books that were being produced for children in the 1940s and 50s, especially the beginning of the Cold War was heating up. And you focused on two series of children's books, the Orange books and the Landmark books. Tell me about those.
These were two sets of books published specifically to teach American history to children. And they sort of just happened to arise at the same time. They tell a lot of similar stories about the American past. And they were kind of also a collectible item for baby boomers eager to read. And with the Orange books, you could have a whole bookshelf of the orange bindings that, showed that you had read all of these different stories. They primarily focus on white men, individuals of great individuals of history, and war battles. There's a tremendous number of books about war, and this isn't a mistake. This isn't by chance that this happens. There's a very specific way we think about history. There's a very specific way we focus on individuals as opposed to community, and these books just highlight, especially the Cold War mentality of nationalism and masculinity, and there's very few about women, very few about non-white people.
And Americans as good people.
Yes.
And freedom-loving people.
Yeah, American exceptionalism.
And courageous people who had conquered the American West.
Absolutely. I mean, it's lacking in nuance, these stories, which I don't think is because they're written for children. I think children can handle nuance, but they have a very specific agenda to teach children. It was, it wasn't malicious per se, but it reflects the time period they were written in much more than the history that they're about, which is the case I found with all of these case studies. They reflect modern inclinations.
And what did they want to teach children?
They objective history, supposedly, but really it was about who was important in American history and how you can be a good American citizen. You can be brave, you can be tough if you're a boy. If you're a girl, you can be submissive, and you might be courageous, but it's to help men. And these stories were reinforced over and over again.
Now, I don't know if this was an Orange book or a Landmark book, but I remember the story about George Washington chopping down the cherry tree, and then when he was confronted about it, he confessed because I cannot tell a lie.
I mean, that's what's so fascinating about this topic is these stories really stick in your brain. They last, and it doesn't mean all children take them at face value, but we have these myths about America, and we get them not just from our lessons in school, but from all kinds of media, from television. And what I find very interesting about the Cold War chapter of the book is that this is a time when, people were being blacklisted. The books were reflecting trends that were also on television with cowboys and Indians and Roy Rogers, all of these television shows. But it didn't mean that the baby boomers grew up to be obedient little citizens. It's an example of how the stories that we're telling children are not just passively accepted.
Yeah. Interestingly, one black person who was included in these books was the story of George Washington Carver, the black scientist who found so many uses of the peanut. They seem to be fascinated with him.
Yeah, there was always a kind of select few characters who made the cut who were included in these stories. And then often that was how you could say your stories were inclusive. And you know, it really just provides a very narrow view of history, of the people who are involved in our past. And we hear the Sacagawea, George Washington Carver, those are the two, Pocahontas. There's a select group of people who come to represent all minority populations in U.S. history.
In one chapter, you tell the story of Freedom Land USA, which I had never heard about before. And apparently this was a huge amusement park, 85 acres, situated in the South Bronx from 1960 to 64. And why did you include Freedom Land in your book? I mean, what did the park try to do and why did it fail?
It's a fascinating little piece of New York City history that it was short-lived and it's been completely erased from the New York City landscape. So it doesn't get talked about a lot. People are often surprised to hear this. But it's an amusement park. I mean, I just became fascinated with it. It's an amusement park that was shaped in the shape of the continental United States, sitting where Co-op City is today, that was meant to compete with Disney World, was meant to be a long-lasting park for children in New York City. So it was called Freedom Land. It was about U.S. history, and they told historical stories within the walls of the park. So you could go in, you'd experience the Chicago Fire of 1871, or the earthquake of San Francisco in 1906, or Civil War battles, of course. And it was tremendously successful at first. It brought a lot of people, but it really faded quickly. It went bankrupt. It had tons of problems. It started incorporating other parts of history like Roman chariots and medieval knights.
Oh, that's very American.
Yeah. Just a hodgepodge of different, mostly violent moments in the past. And it really just failed to capture the imagination of young people. It only existed from 1960 to 1964. There's a theory today that it was only built to show that the land, which is very marshy land up there, could support structures, and then it was always meant to be razed to the ground to make way for Co-op City. But I have trouble believing that people would put so much effort into the story behind it, into the narratives, and the idea that it was educational if it was really just to show that structures could be held. So there's still something behind that.
One of your chapters is focused primarily on the American Girl doll, which has been extremely successful.
Yes.
Why? What's unique about it, and what's the reason for the success?
Sure. This book started with that chapter, really. I grew up with American Girl dolls in the 80s, and it's where I started investigating. You know, the dolls are originally meant to teach history. So all of my case studies are about items that specifically were concerned with teaching history. And these dolls were very well researched. They came with books about different eras in history, and these dolls lived in those times. So
and each doll had a particular story about her life and the era in which she lived.
Yes, so the doll from World War II experienced food rationing. The doll from colonial times was rebellious and independent and trying to figure out how to help America gain independence as well. So their characteristics sort of reflected the time period that they were supposed to be in. And I noticed that there were a lot of women my age growing up and really having their view of history shaped by these dolls. It was really a potent influence. And these dolls, in turn, have become very they now focus on modern times. It's just kind of like everything that we have as adults as miniaturized. And I felt that it was a dangerous place to be where we had kind of the privatization of history, so only some people could afford to access this history.
These dolls were expensive.
The dolls are very expensive.
How much are they now? Over $100?
Yes, $115. They were $86 or $82 in 1986
Wow.
when they
I think
started.
I bought my Barbie for $3.
Yeah, it's definitely different from a Barbie doll that you could get at any toy store. These were mail order catalogs to begin with. And
they sell all kinds of
accessories. And you can buy, a Victorian bed for your doll that's hand woven, even though it's mass produced. There's the items that are in the books are available for purchase. So while anybody can read the books, and that's not cut off in the same way, to really feel like you're part of that world, you need to buy all these items. So it's a really kind of dangerous way, even if they have good intentions to teach history, it becomes a very elite club that can access it.
Is there a different kind of toys, books, amusements that are being marketed to children now? I don't know how much you got into that, but is that your sense?
I do not have a lot of expertise in the online world of children's amusements. I think there's so much going on digitally now that I don't have a good sense of that. I think, though, my hunch is that a lot of the trends from a century ago are continuing today. There's still an obsession with individualism and with American exceptionalism. White supremacy is rearing its ugly head, in all facets of our media and cultural landscape right now. So our consumer world, and they're not going to go away overnight.
Was there anything that you found in your research that really surprised you?
There were a lot of things that surprised me in my research, but I would say it came primarily from the little glimpses I'd get of how children received these messages and these dolls and toys. So the rebelliousness that I saw in letters children wrote to the publisher about the Landmark books, or when I read about how children play with dolls, and it's never just playing house. So I was very heartened by that. I think that we as adults think we have more control than we do over the messages that children receive, but they are inventing their own worlds all the time.
And they rebel against some of those messages?
Absolutely. I think that we have to work hard to ingrain some of these messages in children, and it's not naturally occurring in their psyche. They're creative.
There is a lot of controversy now, as I mentioned earlier, about what kinds of things children should be taught in school, whether they should be taught the truth about our difficult national history or not. Do you see progress in the area in terms of how we use items of amusement to teach students the truth about their country, the truth about their history? Are we making progress, or are we sort of in the same place?
I think there are certainly instances of progress, and then there's this very vocal instance we're seeing against critical race theory of people trying to really continue this trend of erasing the tough parts of our past. And it's really heartbreaking, because hiding history, hiding the truth from children is not going to create engaged, civically minded people. I think this debate about what children hear about is missing the point, because children need to be taught how to deal with conflict, how to come to terms with a really sordid American past, and think critically about what they're seeing. So,
in other words, you need to tell them the truth, and they'll be all right with it.
Yes, if we respect children, give them the agency that they deserve to grapple with these tough matters, then they are better equipped to face the world as adults, rather than living in an alternate reality and then not knowing how to see other worldviews when they grow up.
Well, I found the book very interesting. I learned a lot of stuff that I didn't know about, the history of the toy business and dolls and certainly the Freedom Land. Wow, I didn't know about that. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'd like to thank Molly Rosner, the Director of Education Programs at the LaGuardia and Wagner Archives of LaGuardia Community College, and author of Playing with History, American Identities and Children's Consumer Culture, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Twitter at One2One CUNY TV. For the City University of New York and One2One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy.